Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Salas. I hope this video finds you all doing well. In this video for today, I'm going to be going over the article that we read for week number 12, Translinguality by Horner and Alvarez. I saw in the discussions post that there was a number of confusion, that this was a pretty difficult article to get to, and I agree with you all. It's a pretty dense article that has a lot of theory, and it is definitely geared for an audience that has more of a linguistic as well as translingual background. So I'm going to give you all just a few minutes to kind of just go through this article, make sure that we are all on the same page. We kind of understand the concept and what Horner and Alvarez were trying to do. So to begin, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you all about the rhetorical reading and the purpose of this piece. So I wanted to start here to kind of get us all on the same page. So as most of you all identified correctly within the discussions post, that this article was mostly geared towards scholars in rhetoric and composition and linguistics who are studying the concept of translingualism. But they explicitly state in their piece that the purpose of their article is not to identify a correct meaning for translinguality, nor do they expect to be able to resolve all disputes about the meaning of the term. But instead of trying to find one fixed and correct meaning for translinguality, they are instead using this article to kind of bring together the history, put together an idea of how this term has been used, kind of putting all of those conversations together. And the purpose of putting all of those conversations together is to, quote, tease out differences in the positions that might be taken on language and languages, language users, context of use, and the relations of all those to one another, and to better understand how writing takes place within and beyond the norms of monolingualism. So in other words, what this article is trying to do is to tease out those differences of opinions, but also to present their own position of how we can understand language and multi-language usage in different contexts and different users. So their project isn't necessarily really concentrating on, or does it care to kind of catalog the various positions, but instead they're mostly interested in advancing a particular position and articulating what distinguishes those positions from others. So, what is the position that they're trying to take? We'll get into that into just a moment. So here, they start their article by kind of giving us a background of what are the various conversations happening on this concept. All right, so they start their article off by kind of giving us a few of the background conversations that have been happening on this concept. So here, they're kind of positioning where their definition is coming from. And they're really concentrating on treating languages and even language practices as commodities. And they're doing this because commodity relationships include the role of concrete labor in reproducing language, rendering language not as itself the ongoing outcome of labor, but instead and at most a set of available tools or resources for achieving so-called transparent or effective communication. And you'll notice in the piece that the thing that distinguishes their definition of translinguality from other usages of the term is this idea of labor. And so the way that they get to labor is by thinking about what is the commodity? How is treating language like a commodity? And then how is looking at the commodity as seeing a set of tools or resources is what distinguishes their definition of translinguality. So here, a translingual orientation can bring back into recognition the role that concrete labor in sustaining and revising language, and hence can redefine the social relations between and among language users and language. By recognizing the role of language users' concrete labor in sustaining and revising language, a translingual orientation acknowledges opacity and friction as normal components of social interactions rather than as problems to be eradicated or condemned. So here, this is the sticking point for them in their definition. So when we think about translingualism, they're trying to be proponents of, to push forward this new way of thinking of translingualism, not as something that happens that's a mistake or something that doesn't normally happen, something like an anomaly, but instead something that happens all the time. And if we think about it as it's something that's the norm, this is what normally happens, then how does that change how we think about it? What is the labor? What is the actual work that is happening when we are communicating, when we're using language? And then how can we then better create theories that actually captures the work of what is happening when we communicate through language and languages? And again, it's a shift. It's not just this is something that happens on the outside, occasionally with just multilingual users, but this is something that happens with language use. If we recenter our conception that this is the norm and not the exception, what are the theories that we can create? And one theory that they're creating is to look at the labor practices in language usage. So for a few pages, the article gives a quick background on, not so much quick, but gives a thorough background on some of the key players in the field who have used translingual theory or who have been proponents of it and tried to develop it. But here I want to draw us to, and I'll make these slides available to you all so you can kind of go through them. But I wanted to just bring us back to the main point. So a translingual, this is on page 10 of the article, but a translingual approach, we argue, can and should be defined in a way that constitutes a break with dominant monolingualist language ideology. So again, it's thinking if we can break this idea that there is only one language being used when we communicate, and instead that the norm becomes multilingual, plurilingual, bilingual, multiple language usages, then how is it that we can then reconceptualize language usage? So that's the translingual approach. It's kind of reshifting what is the focus. And if we do that reshifting, if we do that refocus, then it's looking at a focus on labor as its points of address in defining language difference. So what is the labor involved within different language usage? So here, it is a foundation in a labor theory of language leads to a quite different, though not competing, set of social justice concerns in relation to language differences than those articulated by advocates of translanguaging and plurilingualism. It defines language difference in terms of labor that is not typically recognized as labor, and hence a definition not readily recognizable as having anything to do with either language difference or social justice. Given its applicability to all language use and users, a translingual theory is thereby less likely to be relegated to the cultural margins, for it takes as its point of departure not particular language practices already marked by the language ideology of monolingual as different, but instead all language as labor confronting and producing difference. And so that is one of their main points. They continue this on page 12. And again, this is a large screen with a lot of text here, but I want us to kind of focus on the parts that I bolded. So then rather than asking what words or other linguistic features to allow or not, or to categorize in a particular way to achieve transparency in communication, their particular lens on translinguality focuses on the labor involved in reproducing specific languages. It asks, what difference any particular utterance, by definition phenomenologically different from others in spatio-temporal locations and therefore in socio-political significance, might make, and by means of what kinds of labor? It asks what difference an utterance might make to the language deployed, whether and how it might reinforce and thereby contribute to the sedimentation of, challenge, or pose new meanings to specific lexical, grammatical, and other cultural practices, and how the labor of utterance inevitably transforms those practices, including the transformation represented by their further sedimentation, and what processes and conditions might contribute to any one of those consequences. So this article had a lot of information. They were giving you a lot of different stances and history on the use of the term translanguaging, language use. So this article is really trying to push forward an idea that what would happen if we re-centered our ideas on language usage. So if we stop thinking of monolingualism as the center, and if we started thinking about multiple language usages as being the center, as that being the norm, what would happen to our theories that then explain how language is used, to communicate if we think about it as multiple languages happening at once. So the use of multiple languages at once, not being the exception but the norm, what does that do? And the way that they're trying to get at that is by looking at issues of labor. What is actually happening? Who is laboring? What is the labor involved in trying to communicate effectively in those moments? Because as they advocate, that labor happens also within single language communication, right? But there's different languages in that single language communication, as we discussed earlier. So this is just a quick synopsis just to kind of get us all on the same page for this one particular article. Let me know if you all have any other questions on this. I'd be happy to talk to you. You can send me an email. We can set up office hours. But that's just a quick intro into this particular piece. And I'm going to make these slides available to you all so you have them accessible and you can always refer to them later.